we want to distinguish between movement along IS curve versus shifts in IS curve. So it's a true and false question where we're told that if R decreases, the IS curve shifts to the right due to the increase in aggregate demand from higher investment. And the second statement is if G bar increases, IS curve shifts to the right due to an increase in aggregate demand from higher fiscal spending. So you want to distinguish the change in demand which happens due to interest rate versus the change in demand which happens for factors other than the interest rate. So moving on. So let's start with this question. Page. Okay, so essentially what we want to do is we want to compare movement. Let me just first find this out. Then okay. So we want to essentially compare movement along IS curve versus shift in IS curve. So let's look at movement along IS curve. Now this happens when interest rate changes. Say R decreases, that causes investment to increase. Why? Because we know the investment negatively depends upon R, there's a negative relationship. So as interest rate goes down, investment goes up because interest rate represents the cost of borrowing. Now when investment increases, demand Z increases. Now why is that? That is because we know Z is made up of C plus I plus G in a closed economy. So if I goes up, right, Z is also going to go up. So basically, the demand schedule shifts in the demand schedule shifts up. In the goods market model. So that's what happens. And we know in the goods market model, when demand schedule shifts up, Y increases, right? So which is reinforced through the multiplier effect. Through the multiplier effect, we see an increase in Y. So this is the movement along the IS curve, right? When interest rate changes, investment changes, the demand schedule shifts upwards and output or income increases. Now let's compare this to shift in IS curve. Now the key here is that at any value of R, so the key here is any value, right? Like R is not changing. For any value of R, what's going to happen is, say G increases, like in the question, then demand Z increases. Again, why does demand Z increase? Because Z is equal to C plus I plus G. So here as G increases, Z increases. So again, the demand schedule will shift up like before, but now shifts up for given R, right? For any given R. So in this case, it's not the R which is shifting the demand schedule, but for a given R, the demand schedule is shifting upwards in the goods market model. So there's a difference. In both cases, it's shifting upwards. In the first case, it's because of interest rate. In the second case, it's because of a factor other than interest rate. So it's shifting for a given interest rate and the goods market model. And when this happens, again, the end result is the same. Y increases. Y increases for any given R, right? That's the whole idea here. Okay, increases for any given R, right? There, in both cases, Y was increasing, and obviously this is reinforced through the multiplier effect in this case also. So the difference is in the first case, the interest rate change was causing demand and output to change. In the second case, the change in demand and output was happening for a given value of R. So thus the idea is this, since as here as R increases, Y decreases, so movement along IS curve. Here, since Y increases for any given R, IS shifts. Since Y increases for any given R, again this is the key, for any given R, IS shifts to the right. So in both cases, demand and output are increasing. There, it's because of interest rate, so there's just a movement. Here, it's for any given value of R, and thus it's a shift. IS shifts to the right. Right, so let's now try to understand all of this graphically. Let's just clear this up. Let's understand it graphically. So graphically, again, first let's here understand movement along IS curves. Shift of IS. So we know in the top panel we're going to plot our goods market model. In the lower panel we'll plot our IS curve in both cases, and you'll look at this. So here we'll plot our this, and here we will plot this and this. Right, so if we just change it a bit. Yeah, okay, so now what we're gonna do is, okay, so let's make our main diagram. So over here we know we have the 45-degree line, like in both figures. And then we have our original demand schedule in both cases, right? And then in both cases, let's make an IS curve. So let's make an IS curve here. Okay, so basically what we're doing is, so let's say this is like the 45, oh sorry, so this is the 45-degree line, this is the 45-degree line, and this is z is equal to c plus I r1 plus t, and this is also z is equal to c plus I r1 plus g. So this is like where we begin, and this is like this was z, this was y, and here we have y1. So in the IS curve, we know this corresponds to the point R1. So this is R1 and this is Y1. So this is one point on the IS curve corresponding to R1, Y1 in the goods market model. Similarly, over here, we have Z and we have Y. And here again, we have R and Y. And if we label these x's too, this is R, this is Y. Similarly here, let's say we have y1, and on the IS curve again, this is a point corresponding to r1 and y1. So we started off with this IS curve with this particular point r1, y1. Now in this case, let's change interest rate to R2. So now when interest rate changes to R2, what's going to happen is, we know, like we discussed, the demand schedule is going to shift up because investment increases, right? So we're going to see an upward. Here, instead of increasing R1, let's increase G. In both cases, we know the demand schedule shifts up. In this case, in the first case, the demand schedule shifts up because of the change in interest rate, right? Here, the demand schedule shifts up because the interest rate goes up, right? So the interest rate has gone up. That's why it has shifted up in this case. But G is the same, right? In this case, however, the interest rate has gone down. Sorry. So here it shifts up because interest rate has gone down. G is the same. So here we know the interest rate is still the same. Rather, G has increased. So here, like we mentioned before, the G point, the demand schedule shifts for a given interest rate, right? So the shift has happened in both cases. In the first case, however, the shift has happened because interest rate has gone down. First, the demand schedule was corresponding to IR1, now it's corresponding to IR2. Here, the shift has happened because G has increased for any given interest rate in this. So that's why the demand schedule is shifted upward. So this is the new equilibrium output in both cases, which is Y2. And this is Y2. So in both cases, output has increased. In this case, the increase is because of a decrease in interest rate. So Y2 corresponds to R2 in the graph here, right? Because it's because of a decrease in interest rate, right? So just a movement down the IS curve. Because you started with Y1, R1, you reduce the interest rate to R2, and associated with this R2 is a higher output. So just a movement down the IS curve. In this case, however, we know that Y2 is still associated with interest rate R1. So when I plot it on the IS curve, we plot it like this. This is the point Y2 R1, because again, the demand and output change for the given interest rates. In this case, we can see the entire curve has shifted towards the right. So if we make this now, If we make this like this, so we can see the entire curve has shifted towards the right because demand and output have increased for a given interest rate in this case, right? So the entire curve has shifted towards the right in this case. So this represents essentially delta y because output has changed for a given interest rate. The y1 to y2 is a change in output for a given interest rate, in this case r1. Right, so this was like y2 r2 here. So this is how we can distinguish between a movement along y curve versus a shifting y curve. Here you can see as interest rate goes down, output has gone up and this is just a movement. Here, for any given interest rate, because demand and output increase, so it's a shift towards the right y curve. So this is the difference here. So now let's look at the key takeaway from here. So the key takeaway is that changes in R cause movement along IS curve. Because when R changes, Y changes, you just move from one point to the other. Movement along IS curve. Changes in factors that affect demand for goods. Changes in factors that affect demand for goods. Z is equal to C plus I plus T in a closed economy for a given R. Again, the idea is that this happens for a given R. R does not change. Shift of IS curve. So this results in shifts of IS curve. Shift of IS curve as out as at any value of R, as for any given R. Output in goods market equilibrium changes. So if interest rate changes, it's just a movement. If demand changes for any reason other than interest rate, like investment has changed because say changes in business confidence, that's going to cause shifts in IS curve. But if investment had changed because of change in interest rate, that will just be movement.